Now, ladies and gentlemen, already waiting a number of panelists that we want to discuss with. Of course, first listen to their statements. And when I say a number of panelists, we are trying to onboard them almost at the same time. In this panel, we're going to talk both about the technological challenges, about the new kids on town like hydrogen. We've just heard about the circular carbon economy as a concept, but then we also want to know what can other players bring to the table, bring to the solutions. What does business community do? What do think tanks do? And many, many more questions that we have. So let me just briefly, very briefly, introduce our panelists, and then we'll go one by one to have them give a couple of statements, and then we're actually going to go into discussion. Now, you'll be seeing one of those typical, there it is, one of those typical Zoom pictures. So hello to Rabia Ferroukhi from the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. She's Director of Knowledge Policy and the Finance Center. And there she is, hi. Then I say hello to Frank Wouters, Global Lead Green Hydrogen, Worley, and another connection to IRENA, because once upon a time you were the boss there, so a very close connection. I'm extremely happy to have Sabine Nallinger on board. She is the Managing Director of the Foundation 2 Degrees, and I think nomen est omen, as we say, no more than 2 degrees shall the temperature rise. And here we're talking about a business initiative mainly. Then I'm very happy that Princess Mashael bint Saud Al Shalan, the founding partner of AEON Strategy, is with us to share her thoughts with us. Wonderful that you are here. And who have I left out? Sonia, Medina, the Executive Director, Climate Change. CIFF is one of the most important players in climate and climate advocacy, and apparently you and the Foundations 20 have been in good connection up to now, and I see by your grin, by your smile, that that is the case. So we will have a 6th person on board very briefly, but you know, time is of the essence, and from 11 o'clock onwards, we'll have Italy on board. He is already there, I hear. Okay, so I also like to extend a warm welcome, ciao, to Professor Enrico Giovannini. There he is. Grand.
Yes, sorry for being late.
No, you're actually early. I was told that you're only there at 11. Anyway, let me kick off with Dr. Rabia Ferroukhi. We have already heard from the boss of IRENA presently where the sort of big picture goes. Seeing that you're Director of Knowledge and Policy, you have a different twist to what you can share with us. So take your 2 minutes. If you're going to be 3 minutes, we're not going to throw you out of the Zoom frame.
Thank you so much, Connie. Thank you very much for your moderation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in line with what our Director General just mentioned this morning, the crisis has basically further unveiled the fact that the narrative around the energy transition has largely been technology-oriented. So our work at IRENA starts with the premise that a global just transition requires a transformation, of course, of the energy system, renewable energy based, but also the transformation of the socioeconomic structure that it's built upon. So efforts in one cannot fully succeed without other measures that are taken in the other policy categories, let's say. So I'll go into the categories of policy a bit later, but maybe just to tell you that over the past few years, we have been estimating the socioeconomic footprint of the energy transition and really outlining comprehensive policy frameworks to ensure that the outcome benefits the majority. And this is how our quantitative work has given evidence that by increasing the shares of renewable together with energy efficiency measure in line with global climate objectives will generate socioeconomic benefits with positive impacts on GDP, economic growth, job creation, and welfare, both in the long term and in the short term. While I'll go into the policies later on, I would like just to mention that we did a post-recovery estimate with a 3-year timeline, and we show that with a 2 trillion investment in the energy transition pathway that we recommend, a global GDP could boost by an additional 1% compared to the planned scenario, let's say the planned from governments, and that would generate in the coming 3 years over 5 million jobs in renewables, energy efficiency, and grids and energy system flexibility. If you look at the timeline to 2030, the same kind of positive outcomes are there. So the message I want to give before speaking later on more precisely about policies and the types of policies that are comprehensive, holistic, and then bring together energy policy together with the other broader policies, industrial, labor policy, etc. Maybe just that at a time that when governments are defining their recovery plans and their strategies, we really have, as was mentioned earlier, a unique opportunity to link the short-term urgency with long-term goals by integrating this holistic policy framework that complements the technological aspects, but doesn't let the narrative and the recommendation really isolated with the technology discourse that would ensure the socioeconomic and environmental benefits to the majority with the underlying imperative for greater collaboration. So I look forward to speaking a little more about this holistic policy framework later on, Connie, if time allows. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We have one question right now, and then we're going to have more questions during the panel discussion. So,
Rabia, thank you very much for your comment and your statement. One point I want to raise is holistic approach to go out of the silos. We are all somehow in silos. Even the renewable community somehow could be in silo. But what to do towards the international energy agency, because that is somehow the other organization doing a lot on energy, and there is also some change, some transformation even in between of IEA. But perhaps you can refer shortly on this, how you try, both of you, to come forward in this regard.
Thank you very much. As you know, we have a good collaboration and we work on certain specific topics together very well. The idea that we have been bringing up for many years now, and I think there is a sort of awareness, a greater awareness of this, is that direct support for deployment policies are of course very important, and we can talk about it later on. But we need to also have market designs to integrate a higher share of variable renewable energy. And again, I can speak about that later. But I think the one new aspects that more and more institutions, including the IEA, are now considering is this enabling environment with, as I said, policies that really that can support the socioeconomic structures that the energy transition is built on. And that includes, as you saw in many publications since COVID, jobs is number one. And we've been working for many years on that. This is why I was speaking about the socioeconomic footprint. Jobs is a main focus there, where in order to make sure that we go towards resilience, development, and equality, we will need these enabling policies also to be addressed and introduced. And that includes, very briefly, industrial policy, education training, labor market policies, that together, of course, with energy policies that are tailored to the specific needs of each regions and country, because they really depend on many initial conditions and development in different fields.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabia, also for sort of highlighting the importance of the social aspect, i.e. sort of the gaining of jobs, because a couple of old jobs will just go, and that's often something that in societies holds up the will to transition, the fear of losing jobs. So as long as we have the idea, yes, there can be more, the pathway towards change might be easier. And with that, I'd like to bring Frank Wouters in. Frank, hydrogen right at the moment seems to be grabbing the headlines. And you must be grinning, and you are grinning, simply because you've probably been on the road with hydrogen and also with green hydrogen for many, many years. First of all, what has happened that it's now become such a craze and the best thing, the new kid on the block?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a good question. I mean, and as the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, who recently released a very ambitious hydrogen strategy, he calls it the rock star of the energy transition. And but the question is indeed, is it a hype or is it here to stay? Because many people. Hydrogen is not new. There was a sort of a wave 10, 15 years ago when, certain companies went, on the stock market. Many people lost money on that. So there is some level of skepticism whether this is now really real and is it going to happen. I think the difference is that to make green hydrogen, which is probably the majority of the hydrogen that we're going to need, is made with renewable electricity, and that is now cheap. And I think that's the main difference that we're having in the system, and that we didn't have before. So there is a real business case, to add to green electricity in the energy system, to make green gas, to make it a combination that basically can do everything. One of the issues with hydrogen is that, or with electricity rather, is that electricity is only 20% of all final energy use. And we're going to massively increase the level of electricity because we can now make it clean in a cost-effective way. But once you get to 50%, you're going to start to see that it's becoming more and more difficult. But that is going to happen. So we'll have a lot more electricity in the system that will be used for heating. It will be used for driving cars. It will be used for many things where we now use fossil fuels. And the main question is, what are we going to do with the other 50%? If we're really serious about climate change, if we really want to take climate action and basically replace fossil fuels. And there is very few things that can do what hydrogen can do. And this is, I think this is the realization that we're seeing all over the world. More and more countries are releasing hydrogen strategies. I already mentioned the European hydrogen strategy was released on 8th July. It is the most ambitious strategy that we've seen so far. I think Europe is firmly seeing this as an opportunity to also lead. Europe has 200,000 kilometers of high-pressure gas pipes and a multitude of that in the distribution. So you can actually use that. So one of the issues is in the energy transition is that you need infrastructure to get it from the new places where you're generating electricity to the demand centers. And if you already have a gas network that you can convert to accommodate hydrogen at relatively modest cost, that's a massive advantage. It's also connected to neighboring regions. For example, there's gas pipes between Libya and Europe, Morocco and Europe, of course, Russia and Norway. And all of that can be used also for hydrogen at relatively modest cost. Now, the European strategy is very, very rich in ambition. It's the most ambitious strategy of all strategies that have been released in the last year, but it's very poor on policy. And I think to Rabia's point, that this is where all the focus should go now. And if give you one example, Europe wants to have 1 million tons of green hydrogen in 2024. 6 gigawatts of electrolysis capacity. For those of you that are not conversant with those numbers, that is a lot. At the moment, we're not making anywhere near that. and we do need to ramp up all of the projects and the mechanisms to make those projects work. And that is actually where the bulk of the focus should go now, to create an environment, a policy environment, not just the financial, the business case, but also the safety aspects, the standards, the guarantee, the carbon content of the hydrogen. There's so many things that need to be sorted out for this to work. And if we do it in the traditional way, it'll take too long. It won't happen. So I think there's also an innovation necessary, an acceleration necessary in the thinking around policy and how to do that much more quickly, so that this is actually happening in the time frame that we need it.
Very quick question by Klaus.
Yeah, thank you so much to bring us into the picture, the broader picture, and to show up there is now a window of opportunity, also because of the price signals we have worldwide. But as you know, there are many different strategies on the table in the same time, not all focusing on green hydrogen. Even in the German government, in the different ministries, we have different strategies. So who should take the lead when we focus on the G20 to bring this forward? We heard the elaboration of Tony Chan in Saudi Arabia. That's also interesting for the Arabic region, what we are talking about. So what do you think for the G20 process, and perhaps in between of the G20, the G7 process, next year led by UK? And next year, G20 is in the hand of Italy. So what do you think with the European Green Deal as a cornerstone in the middle, what could be done also from the European side, but is that enough for taking the lead in between of the G20?
And please, a short answer.
Yeah, sorry, that's a good question. I think Germany is definitely one of the front runners. We've heard Mr. Chan's example of NEOM, so also Saudi Arabia is making very, very big, ambitious steps. And we know that Germany has, Germany also released a hydrogen strategy, 9 billion euro, 2 billion of which will be for import projects. So, investments abroad that will benefit Germany, but also probably the local market. Not sure they're going to pay Saudi to build hydrogen or ammonia capacity. That is probably going elsewhere, but there will be those bilateral links to get also that international component going. And I think Germany, Saudi Arabia, they're already talking to each other about these things. Morocco, another very, very close friend of Europe, also bilateral talks between Germany and Morocco. It's obviously not G20, but still, Saudi Arabia, Germany, definitely.
Frank, thank you very much also for keeping to a short answer, and you're going to be part of the panel discussion afterwards. And with that, I would love to address Sabine Nallinger. Sabine, when we look at the discussion, of course, in the past, but I really stress in the past, everybody said, oh, the bad companies, businesses are just sort of greenwashing. They're just sort of showing to the outside world that they're good, but in fact, they're not good. Now, in my experience in the last 3-4 years, and your organization actually predates that, one can actually see that there are a hell of a lot of business initiatives saying, we want green energy, we want to have sustainable production methods. We want, in fact, I think yesterday there was a big European initiative saying, Ursula von der Leyen, keep to your, not just the limits that you've set, do them in a much more strict way. So Sabine, take us along. Why does business do all that?
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction, Connie. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Great speakers, great session, I think, and a right approach. So as you mentioned, solution-orientated is how we look at these challenging times at Foundation 2 Degrees. So we are founded by 25 German big companies from all sectors over the economy, and we are growing despite Corona. So my key message today to you is we do have all technical solutions which we need for the transition, climate neutral economy. But what we need, however, is G20 governments to work a little harder for providing companies with the ability to implement them. Let me explain my thoughts. Without doubt, we are in a historic global crisis. Societies and companies across the globe have been hit hard. Uncertainty remains high until we have a vaccine for the virus. And at the same time, we have a unique window of opportunity in front of us. Despite all hardship and losses, Corona was taught us how strong our societies can be if we all work towards a common goal. And across the globe, governments are investing trillions for the economy to recover. If we use these investments in the right way, the transition to a carbon neutral economy can be accelerated, while social disruption and dangerous climate change can be avoided. So European governments have understood this, I think so. And with the European Green Deal, we have a vision for boosting the European economy with innovation and for making Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. This is a green growth strategy will secure jobs, generate local revenue, and protect the environment and our health. And from this experience, I can tell you, European companies want to see this vision become a reality. European companies want to be part of this solution. Mm-hmm. So, however, that they need now is more than setting political goals. They need bold and they need decisive government support and providing the right mix of policy instruments that enable them to take on those extraordinary challenges. So as an example, if we want companies to provide carbon neutral steel at competitive cost, then governments should wait no longer to massively scale up investments in hydrogen infrastructure and renewable energy. So, and the same is true to low carbon technologies in the buildings or transportation sector. Mm-hmm. Why I like the title of our F20 recommendation to the G20 responsibility. So if G20 governments provide companies with planning and investment security, if they provide them with ability, then they can do what they can do best. Task risks, be creative, be innovative. There is no perfect solution. There is no silver bullet, but we have to act now to build back better from this crisis. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you, Sabine. And as usual, Klaus has the first question.
Very shortly, thank you, Sabine. And this voice of business is so important for the process of the past already, for this moment, but also for the future. And perhaps you can say a few words. How is your relation to the political arena? Because one thing is to build up such a grouping of companies and company leaders to say it clearly what is needed. But of course, you need the channels towards government. And this is a ping pong somehow. Perhaps you can say a little bit about this. I think you have direct entrance to Chancellor Merkel's office.
Yes, we do. Hello, Klaus. Fine to see you today. Finding an answer will be a key, I think so. So there is now a window of opportunity, and the window is those trillions of euros which are to be spent on economic recovery. But thus funds will decide how fast we transition to carbon neutrality and how well we avoid social disruption. So there is, I think, no perfect solutions, and I don't to assess specific policy instruments, but maybe we can identify some principle to guide us. I think the first is we have to act fast and pragmatically while thinking long term. For example, for the EU Green Deal, governments are looking for shovel-ready projects. And the second, I think, is we have to need the right balance. So for awarding front runners and supporting laggards. And thirdly, most citizens to want their governments to provide workable solutions for climate action. We have to make better use of this growing social consensus by building new alliances, working across, for example, party lines, providing, continuing beyond election cycles, harmonizing, and I think that's really important, policy instrument, reducing administrative burdens and enhancing the planning security for companies. So I think these are the main topics that we have to work for in the next years.
Thank you very much, Sabine. At this point, we're going to have a bit more in the panel discussion that's coming up. And with that, I'd like to bring in Princess Mashael. You're the founding partner at AEON Strategy. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And you're actually sort of focusing on quite a lot, everything that we've been talking about, energy, environment, financial, cultural, social inclusion. So I'm quite sure that you can share with us, but maybe something that we haven't heard too much about on the social aspect would be lovely. But your 2 minutes are starting now.
Well, hopefully I can get to the 3, but let's see. So I know that we're on this model. Take a step back. Too often do we think of solutions in vacuum, driven by preferences for one pathway over the other. We tend to try to find the right approach without much consideration for varying, sometimes contrasting circumstances. The reality is that solving for climate change is a complex, reiterative, frustrating, but hopefully a rewarding process. It will require us all to be humble as we seek to solve one of the most complex, urgent, and time-sensitive collective action problems of our time. Climate change action is concerned with equity and vulnerability. It is also rife with deep and persistent uncertainties. So when considering pathways forward, these complexities create an atmosphere of mistrust, questioning of incentives, and at best, action misalignments. So what do we know? Reaching the 1.5 or even the 2 degrees C target cannot be achieved without first reaching net zero emissions, coupled with a ramped up effort to deploy and use negative carbon emission technologies. Another aspect is the time and cost it takes for systems to change. It's inertia, essentially, where scale and capital intensity of the power and heavy industry sectors, for example, make them much harder to decarbonize, at least not in time. 5 IPCC reports and 1 special report later, we fail to see rising scientific confidence and consensus produce the much needed seismic shifts in societal values and norms. Diverging outcomes on the action of the COVID-19 pandemic is case in point. It highlights that positive outcomes are only reached if the right kind of policy choices are made at the right time. They equally highlight that political mistrust and division will have damaging consequences. We ponder a lot of these complexities and the implications on the economy, geopolitics, health, environment, resiliency, you mentioned that earlier today, at AEON Collective, our nonprofit arm. So what's the solution? Charting a pathway forward that's fair, transparent, credible, efficient, and equitable is crucial. So is focusing on the commonalities rather than the differences. This was at the core of the understanding and the thinking that drove the architects of the Paris Agreement and was crucial for its success. So I'll perhaps bypass any solution preferences, but I'll mention one thing on the circular carbon economy, since it's the flagship topic of Saudi Arabia for the G20. I see this as a harmonizing concept that attempts to break some of the siloed approaches and address emissions across the value chain. The concept in its 4 R's is a comprehensive and pragmatic approach when aiming to solve some of the stickier issues. Should we reduce our emissions by investing in blue, green, or I heard yesterday, pink hydrogen? How will we remove carbon from ambient air cost effectively and at the scale that's needed? Should we reuse that carbon to enhance crop production? Should the carbon be recycled into the synthetic fuels for aviation? Should we give greater value for carbon stored in solid form through enhanced weathering, or should we equate it to replanting mangroves? These are a lot of tough questions. And we think that successful outcomes rely on well-structured, mission-driven international and cross-sectoral collaborations that have clear targets based on empirical information and data. Financial support and spending by government and patient capital like that provided by foundations like the F20 is essential for reaching our goals. So maybe I'll keep it at that for now and I'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. And as usual, Klaus does have a question.
Yes, I have very shortly. You spoke about the systemic change which is needed in all these different dimensions. And of course, it must be clear for us there is not only a energy transition, a just energy transition, but transitions in many regards. You stressed some of them. But the price signal, many people say, many think tanks and science says, give carbon a price, and but think about the social dimension, of course. What does it mean for inclusiveness, leave no one behind, and so. Do you agree with this carbon price system we need? But of course, we have to bring it in softly and regarding all the interests of different stakeholders. What do you think about this?
I mean, absolutely. I don't think anyone who knows anything about economics would agree with the concept. The most cost-effective way of reaching set targets. But I think that we need to remind ourselves of the sets of circumstances when having these discussions. Sometimes just the mention of a carbon price makes the other person on the other side of the table close their ears and stop listening into anything that you're saying. Or maybe having unnecessary pushback in certain areas. So having this soft approach to introducing the carbon price is of importance, whether it's a carbon tax, whether it's through markets, a redefinition of what a trading scheme looks like. One that's maybe in Saudi Arabia inclusive of the circular carbon economy, one that's focused and more aligned with the Green New Deal within Europe, should be a mix of these choices should be on the table of the policymaker as they try to move these decisions along. But we have to keep on reminding them of some of the impacts that these types of decisions might have. We've seen some of the negative implications of some of these policies with the Gilets jaunes in France, for example. I don't think that Macron has recovered much since that introduction, and I think just a careful consideration sometimes of the policy rollout, what to roll out one after the other would be of great help.
Thank you.
Even though, of course, there are some countries like Switzerland who have brought about some compensation schemes so that everybody can actually agree to a scheme like that. But again, that's sort of economics. And thank you very much at this point. Maybe we can come back to that. Sonia, finally, I get to you. And in your past, actually, you've done something and you've touched upon an issue that we haven't heard in the last 3 days, and that was the question of biomass supply, where it is a possibility, but that is just from your CV. What we're going to focus on now is, of course, the overruling theme, and you are actually sort of in charge of the climate change portfolio at CIFF. Please share your views with us on that and the outlook that you can give us.
Thank you so much, and it's a great privilege to be here with such a distinguished panel and to be able to share our thoughts on this very important matter. So CIFF is the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. We are the largest private foundation focused on improving children's lives. As we all know, climate change is the single biggest threat to today's children, and therefore it is a key issue that we work at CIFF. As we are hearing, the global pandemic and the financial crisis force us to think about the future we want to create for our children. And as we are all saying, we need that to be a green and just recovery. This needs to take hold with the G20 and universally. However, the numbers show a different reality. Twice as much recovery money from G20 countries has been spent on fossil fuels as clean energy. The green share of total stimulus in the US, India, and China is a meager 1 to 2.4%. That is clearly not enough. Also, bailouts, regardless of the number, needs to be structured appropriately. They must prioritize industries of the future, transition those that needs to, and close industries of the past in a responsible way. Stimulus package should be targeted where they can accelerate the transition, and people need to be in jobs that benefit the climate and the social transition. This, by the way, is obviously CIFF's perspective, but it's also the recommendation of the IMF. So it comes also from very high up. So technologies we know that needs to be deployed, and we are hearing is energy efficiency, renewables, EVs, restoring the graded line, while technologies of the future are developed. But it's very important that we are also using this opportunity to close down and transition the jobs of coal power plants or coal mining or any industry where it is clearly not fit for the future. We also need to deal with emerging debt crisis, especially in emerging and developing countries, in ways that pays off for long-term sustainability. Refinancing that debt with performance-based SDG goals is absolutely critical. So philanthropy, we believe, can play a catalytic role to bring many of these climate solutions to scale. Philanthropy has the flexibility and independence to take risk and fund the levers of change that governments cannot, such as pushing for greater ambition, government ambition, being a neutral broker where that is needed, and supporting business, finance, and technology solutions. Just as a quick example, CIFF approaches the just transition and this green recovery as a social transition, and I think other panels members have also referenced to this. We completely agree. It needs to happen alongside the technical and technological and market solutions in these key sectors. And our approach is embedded in the principles of equity. We're working in a number of countries, but just a couple to illustrate. In South Africa with a big coalition of partners, where, as we know, the power sector is dominated by coal, on a just transition transaction that can help the country and ESCOM to phase out coal and embrace a renewable energy plan. In India, we're also helping to develop a framework of a national transition fund with focus on coal to renewable energy and from ICE, internal combustion engine, to EVs in the transport sector, and in the recovery and stimulus package. And in Southeast Asia, with a number of other governments and philanthropies, we have established an energy transition partnership, which is a multi-stakeholder platform that aims to accelerate the energy transition in Southeast Asia, particularly Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, again, with these principles of equity and social progress. So with that, I'd leave it there, and I'll be very happy to answer questions and participate in the panel discussion. Thank you again for the opportunity to share our thoughts.
Thank you so much. And being the journalist that I am, just for a second, I'm going to be faster than Klaus. What have you found in the projects that you're doing about the just transition? What works?
So what I think it's really important, what is really important there is to be very granular about what community's reality is. You need to meet people where they are. It is very important not to be kept at the macro level in terms of number of jobs that can be created at a national level. It matters what is happening at that local level. So we need to have information down to the towns and the villages that are going to be affected by that transition, and plan at that level. And I think that empathy and that very detailed planning is absolutely crucial. If you take, for example, what happened in Asturias in Spain, it had a very particular focus down to the families that were affected and the payments that will needed to be out and how they had that they could be affected. And I think that's critical. It's really focusing on the people that matters.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that idea. And again, that's something where I would like to do a bit more of a deep dive if we do have time. But that gives me the chance. Sorry, Klaus, you're going to talk with Enrico in a moment, to bring in our last panelist. And again, thank you very much, so that you've been there so early. Professor Enrico Giovannini is the spokesperson of the Sustainability Network in Italy, and you've been involved in everything to do with sustainability for many, many years. And of course, we are looking to Italy as sort of the next one in line after Saudi Arabia. What is your take? Where do you see is fast progress possible, and maybe what barriers do we have to overcome?
Thank you very much. And actually, we could take hours to talk about this issue. And this is why, maybe surprising you, I will concentrate my 2 minutes on one point.
Okay.
What I hope is that Italy and the G20 will do what the government of the United States did in 1944, when they decided to build the GDP in terms of the amount of production, just because they wanted to demonstrate to communism that capitalism was able to produce more stuff than communism. As simple as that. That initiative led the way, in a sense, to where we are now. What I would dream of is that the G20 takes a decision to give a mandate to scientists, statisticians, economists, and so on, to rebuild the UN system of national accounts, where people and the planet are the center of the story, not just the amount of production. This would be a huge game changer for companies, for the world, and especially for future generations. The second point I would like to make is, again, to push countries to do what France, Belgium, Norway, Switzerland have already done, and Italy is trying to do it, to include in their constitutions the principle of intergenerational equity, which is the principle of sustainable development. What I mean is that we are facing, as everybody said, the most dramatic crisis of the last century, especially in peacetime, and we need to change the paradigm. A lot of things that have been mentioned are indeed crucial, but I think that to change the paradigm, we need to change the way in which we think, we measure, we maximize what we measure, and in this way, we could really demonstrate to future generations that we got the message.
Thank you so much. And as usual, Klaus takes it away.
Enrico, hello to you in Rome.
Hello, Klaus.
It's great to have you with us. And I think this change of paradigm is so important. We had a very clear announcement on Monday already on a new systemic responsibility. That is somehow the direction you described just now. But for that, we need, of course, discourse on all levels in your country, in the European community, and when we do it well in the European context, perhaps it can be inviting for others in the world. But I think we have to do our homework in a good style. And so it's great that you are spokesperson for more than 220...
70 now.
Pardon?
270.
270 organizations in Italy working on the SDGs and on sustainability, sustainable development. What do you think, how it can work out? It needs time, we have urgency on the table, and how we can push up with the discourses on all levels, because nobody should left behind. That is also a very important message.
Yes, at country level and Italian level, ASviS grew up very quickly. And next week, we will launch the 4th Italian Festival of Sustainable Development, which is organized all over Italy around SDGs for 17 days, exactly the number of days of SDGs.
Yeah.
Last year, we had 1,000 events. This year, of course, will be different. But the participation of the head of the government and other ministers will be an opportunity to understand whether Italy will take seriously the message from the United Nations, from the European Union, and will take the leadership for G20. Let me just add one point about what you mentioned. Indeed, Europe is incredible. I'm admired by what the new Commission is doing. I've been pushing for that for years, as you know very well. And even the report published last week on the strategic foresight and resilience as a new compass of European policies is a great step forward, because the idea that the future will be full of shocks has been now incorporated in their way of thinking. And this is a big paradigm shift. Of course, we have to deliver. Otherwise, citizens will turn to leaders saying, you said so many words, but you're not doing at all. And civil society, foundations, everybody need to be pushing in the same direction. This is where ASviS experience can be helpful for other countries as well. And I would like to thank you for organizing this network to share this kind of experiences.
Well, thank you very much. We now have only 20-25 minutes left for the discussion, and on the way to asking you, ladies and gentlemen, to maybe raise your hand if you want to respond to something that you've heard from the other one on the panel before we asking a question. I would just like to share with you that Ursula von der Leyen has had her big speech this morning, and she did what everybody expected her to do, which is raising the bar. She has now said from the EU and the Green Deal that Sabine mentioned a couple of times as well, that the climate goal has to be increased to 55% reduction until 2030, and that is quite ambitious. 55% reduction counted as from 1990 onwards. I, of course, have a couple of questions, but if you do raise your hand, then I will give you the chance to speak or to react to one of your fellow panelists. I don't see any raised hands. Klaus, if I may ask
Enrico.
this. Enrico.
Yeah, 2 points. You correctly mentioned the speech given by Ursula von der Leyen today.
Yeah.
And it's very important that she also made some proposals for social cohesion, because otherwise no transition will happen.
Yeah.
And this is extremely important. Knowing her when we were both ministers and we launched the Youth Guarantee in Europe, I know how much she cares about these issues. We have to go overcome the idea that sustainability is just an environmental problem, an economic problem, is first of all a social problem. This is where the European approach with the nomination of a commissioner to fight inequalities, including gender disparities, is very important. We have to push in this direction as well. So this is a question to the others. Do you share this kind of matching vision of economic environmental and, of course, social.
I see a couple of nods, and I see Klaus, who's gearing to put in a question right now, but very quickly, and then it's up to them.
Just to take this, Enrico, and take it over to Sonia, because I just want to say it again, CIFF is doing a tremendous job by supporting those who are really needed on the civil society level to do their job in different countries, in different contexts, and so a wonderful example what foundations should do and can do, I would say. And you stressed very strongly what's not so positive, because we heard some good success stories in the statements before, but we need also those who say no longer subsidies on fossils, and so what campaigning is needed, and the voice of civil society. Perhaps you can jump in to give some positioning from your foundation why you are doing this. Of course, this regard to the children and the most vulnerable somehow is important, but perhaps you can explain a little bit more.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Klaus. So at CIFF, we've been working on these issues, the climate issues, for more than 10 years. And our current portfolio of grants is over $500 million. We grant about $150 million a year nowadays to civil society groups, primarily around the world. And the type of things that you need to be doing in order to push the idea of a green and just recovery, which basically has become our new reality for civil society, it's all sorts of things, from mobilization and campaigning, naming and shaming when needed, litigation when needed. At the end of the day, we do have laws and courts that really work around the world. That is critical. But of course, that wouldn't be enough. Civil society cannot be in confrontation with governments and businesses all the time. And we are all on this together. So when it comes to technical assistance to governments or technical assistance to businesses, or just primarily coalition building and bringing people together to actually figure out their differences and plan to the granular level that I mentioned earlier. All of that is part of our approach to the work. Children is at the heart of what we do. They're going to be the main beneficiaries of all of this activity. But we firmly believe that governments and businesses cannot operate if society is not strengthened by a very powerful and well-structured and civil society community that has as strong a voice as others. So that's primarily our work.
Maybe I can bring in Rabia, especially policy, and you mentioned the idea of, yes, it is possible to keep jobs, to grow jobs. Now that's very important. I mean, especially also if I look at the business society that wants to say, yes, we're changing, but we're not going to lose jobs. So what's your advice? What's your observation? Can you unmute yourself?
Apologies.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Connie. I think to many people's point here, I think the job dimension is extremely fundamental. And I would agree that, and on top of that, we've seen the disruption in global supply chains over the COVID crisis, where industrial policy together with education, training, and labor policy becomes crucial. So it's one thing to say it creates jobs, but it doesn't create jobs just by the mere fact that you are deploying these technologies. It needs to be prepared. So you have to support a workforce expansion in the energy transition related field. Again, this is renewables, efficiency, flexibility, etc., and develop the training, education that will minimize the skill gaps that already exist. But it also means reskilling workers, as was mentioned by a panel from the fossil fuel industry, but also leveraging synergies. We found synergies, for example, between oil and gas offshore and offshore wind. So what we've been doing at IRENA is looking at each technology and the segments of the value chain and what is required in terms of materials to do it, but also in terms of education, training, and the skills required. And all that, of course, to the point of Sonia, needs to be done in a way that can facilitate labor mobility while minimizing social and economic dislocation. I gave you the global picture of jobs and the benefits from an economic point of view, but obviously we have regional and national estimates in order to determine who some countries fare much better than others because they're ready today or more ready, and all that needs to be prepared in order to ensure that the winners of today are not the only winners of tomorrow. So all of that goes hand in hand with the deployment policies that we spoke about, but certainly the policies around this energy transition that can make it successful for people and for communities we need to go more granular, and we need to have that enabling framework that I just briefly mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabia. So Frank, so unmute yourself, and Sabine and Mashael were also wanting to get in. Frank, can you do the kickoff?
Yeah, is my audio a bit better than before? Can you hear me well?
Yeah, absolutely perfect.
Good, fantastic. Yeah, so to Rabia's point, and this is actually, I'm calling from the south of the Netherlands currently, which used to be a very rich part of the country because of the coal mining industry. But for decades, we've been struggling in this region because, the traditional way of approaching that was just, you close the mines, you throw some national money at the region, and basically it hasn't really worked. So one of the things that is currently under discussion because of the COVID crisis is actually trying to find smarter ways of handling this. And Rabia mentioned it, labor mobility. How does that work? The traditional way, if, for example, somebody works in a restaurant which has been hit very hard, you basically you close the company, you lay them off, and then they join the queue in the labor agencies. But why not try to fast track some of these transitions? There is plenty of jobs that are screaming for people. There is installation jobs, etc. And we have to be smart and find ways where you can actually immediately transition somebody. You train them on the job and just do away with some of the bureaucracy that's involved in this. And the energy transition can actually probably piggyback on some of the learnings in a granular way that are currently being found in the economic recovery because of the mass of COVID.
Sabine and Mashael.
Yeah, Connie, I think businesses and business model and climate change, I think it's the same side of the same thing. So as I mentioned, large majority of businesses want to be part of the solution. And if they are going to get climate friendly, they see the business models in the future. So many CEOs have recognized that I think climate change is the most urgent challenges of our time, and that many companies also have started the transformation yet. They started their climate-friendly processes, but these processes nowadays are cost-intensive, so they need politics, they need political instruments, a mixture of political instruments to get these techniques in a greater scale as it is now. But I think what we can mention and what we can see now is that a lot of companies, not only in Europe, I think all over the world, are starting their strategy, are starting their finance process in a direction to a climate-friendly economy.
Thank you. Mashael, and I saw you, Rabia, so you're after Mashael.
Yeah, just to add to what my colleagues were saying, for a lot of these different new industries, even within the circular carbon economy, they tend to be mirror images of what previous technologies were. I'll give a quick example for storage of captured CO2. So a lot of the people, not only within the industry of oil and gas, know intimately the technology that's needed to deploy some of these solutions, but are also having the capabilities, the capacities, the infrastructure that already exists that allows them to do the job that's frankly necessary at this point. That's one side of the equation. The other is maybe to follow up on what our colleague Sonia mentioned earlier. I think that there's equally a huge role, maybe in a time of COVID, particularly when the subject sometimes of discussing climate tends to be at the back of the head of a lot of the people, especially when you're talking maybe sometimes to certain policymakers that are trying at the peak of COVID pandemic, figuring out how to manufacture more ventilators, for example. You're talking about climate in a time where they're trying to deploy a lot of capital to the areas that they're seeing as the areas of greatest need, but forgetting maybe sometimes that those who are vulnerable from things like COVID become even more vulnerable in the future. I really like Tony Chan's cartoon that had the wave of the COVID followed by economic downturn and followed by climate, but we forget that climate itself can create several COVIDs. Yeah. Out of an opportunity like this. We're actually looking into this intersection of GCC, climate and health, because we think that there are some vital areas. When you think of a rich area like the GCC, you tend to forget some of these things that essentially halt your whole economy.
Rabia.
Just very quickly to Frank's point, it's true. I mean, misalignments happen in a trajectory that is changing. So if you want to transition, you're obviously going to have temporal, spatial, educational, sectoral, etc. misalignment that we need to address from now on. And in that sense, the EU's proposed fund of, I think, 110 billion for coal-dependent areas is really crucial. We've seen also with the Scottish regional government transition training fund that retrains and certifies people from oil and gas or workers from oil and gas that have become redundant to benefit thousands of people. And in that same framework, I just want to mention that our results show in terms of the real projects. I mean, we have just evaluated real renewable energy projects, and we see that a large part of the workers are unskilled workers. So there's some, of course, highly qualified, some STEM people, etc. But there are also unskilled labor that can move relatively quickly in that transition. So that was just to Frank's point about the coal industry.
Yes, I want to raise up a very important point regarding the year 2020. We all were aware that 2020 should be the climate year regarding the Paris Climate Agreement, and we lost time a lot. And so next year, I think, is very important, very crucial to do better and to combine it, of course, as mentioned just now, with the COVID-19 crisis and with the economic crisis, which will follow, but to do it hand in hand. So Sonia and Enrico, Sonia, you are in UK, CIFF is based in UK, so UK takes over the G7 presidency next year and has to bring up the COP26 in somewhere in UK, perhaps in Glasgow, nobody knows. And Enrico, Italy is taking over the G20 presidency. So how this can match in a good way, and for the others, how this process can be supported by your technologies, by your agency, by what you are doing on this, because there is urgency in the room and we have to do a lot in front of us. Perhaps you start, Sonia?
Thank you, Klaus, and absolutely. I think we have tremendous opportunities of international negotiations ahead of us with the G7, the COP26 next year. as well as the G20. Also, I think we shouldn't forget, and to Mashael's point about the interconnectivity of many issues, the role of the CVD conference in China.
Absolutely.
Also next year, the interconnectivity of our food systems with the destruction of biodiversity, impacts on climate, obviously livelihoods, and zoonotic diseases. Which are obviously related to COVID, are absolutely integral. So collaboration between the presidents of the G7 and the G20 with China, as it happened a couple of days ago, are critical to start creating that drumbeat of ambition that connects not only action on the finance front, on the technological front, on the more energy side, which of course we know is needed, but not to forget the nature solutions and food transformation, and its link with biodiversity and our health are also very important. And the CVD provides a fantastic opportunity to bring China into the fold.
Yeah.
I just want to throw in one question about speed. When we talk about transition, when we talk about also changing a society or changing an area, there's one area maybe, and not just because it happens to be an area where I'm quite familiar with, North Rhine-Westphalia, which used to be a coal area, used to be a steel area. The transition was made socially acceptable. The only thing is, it took up to 3 decades. We don't have these 3 decades. We don't have that long a time. So how do we get, and Frank is nodding, how do we get speed into everything that we've been saying, also realizing the interconnectedness of the challenges? Frank?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. It's not just North Rhine-Westphalia. I mean, we're seeing now Western Macedonia that is a big coal lignite area that needs to shut down for many reasons. It's not economical and of course climate change, but there is unfortunately not a patent solution that works everywhere. I think that's a reality, but I do think that we need to start thinking about alternative ways of doing this. Rabia mentioned it. For example, in the Netherlands and Germany, we like diplomas a lot. So if you have to do work on a house, whether painting or working on an installation, you need a diploma. You need to go for formal training for several years. Now, if you have a former coal miner or somebody that is an industry that is going to disappear, if you then have to go through, the traditional way of doing it, that's probably not going to cut it. So I do think that that's an important aspect that we also need to think outside the box in terms of labor mobility and how to, train people on the jobs, etc. As Rabia said, many jobs, many people, they don't have formal training because a lot of the work doesn't actually require that. But obviously there is work that you need training for, but you can do a lot on the job. It doesn't necessarily have to be sitting in a classroom, learning everything from A to Z. You can just do hands-on. And that is, some countries, some regions have that. There is models for that, but we just need to think about that, in a much more ambitious way, I think.
Time management in between. Yes, I'd like an answer from each and every one of you. Can you be very short and succinct? And yes, we know that there is no silver bullet. So, Enrico.
Yes, there is no silver bullet indeed, and we need a lot of bullets. Therefore, we need to reactivate the youth movement, which was great and was a little bit weakened because of the COVID. Therefore, we need to find a way to stimulate them to push all the others. The Youth COP26 that will be held in Italy before the Glasgow COP could be a very important occasion to do that.
Well, thank you very much. Much, and I have it on first hand that Fridays for Future is back. We've had the first demonstrations, and there's going to be a big demonstration globally at the end of September. So maybe, Enrico, that will be exactly what you're talking about. Barring the youngsters saying, get your move on. Sabine, business is part of the solution. One cannot reiterate that often enough. How do you think and how speedy can industry, can business work?
Yeah, as we see nowadays, even in Germany and Europe, in the last 3, 4, 5 years, it changed a lot. So even the energy-intensive industries are starting now the process. And I can tell you they are really fast in it, yeah? So even we're talking with the steel industry, cement industry, chemical industry, and they do their job. They are implementing new technology. They are asking politics for enough renewable energy. But I think what they need now is a vision and is an idea of politics. And even it's a plan of politics, how they build enough renewable energy, how they build enough hydrogen infrastructure, for instance. Yeah. So when we talk to the industries, they say we need renewable energy first. And if you talk to the chemical industry, it's just the same as to talk to the steel industry. And they are really afraid about that there is no enough green electricity for all these industrial processes. So what I want to say is, I think now is really a big window open for politics to work together with industry and with business leaders to make this transformation. And I think the speech of Ursula von der Leyen today, I think it makes me proud, and I think it's a good step and it's important. And maybe it's really the first step that Europe is the first climate-free continent in the world. And I can tell you, business leaders are in track. They want to make this transformation.
Lovely. Sabine, I know that you've got to run, so thank you very much for having been with us. Again, expectation management, I see we have another 5 minutes left, which means that I would love you to leave everybody with the one message. And I know, again, it cannot be everything, but with the one message that you want everybody who is listening to this broadcast, to this call, and take away into their lunch break. Maybe Rabia.
Thank you, Connie. I always remember my first economics class. Economics is about production, consumption, and distribution under the constraint of finite resources. I think we come very close now to knowing that they are finite and that we know how to produce and consume efficiently, green, and sustainably, and now we need to also distribute fairly. I think we have the means. It's now the will that needs to follow.
Thank you. Mashael.
Yeah, so essentially, I would like to invite everyone to be open to new ideas and to approach everything that they're doing with sincerity. What's key, I think, in an era of multiple stressors is equally to create spaces to heal rifts that are being created, bridging divides. There's definitely a role for Extinction Rebellion, for example, to push policymakers, but I think the role of the policymaker should be in this new language of healing. And again, we don't know the rate of technological development. We cannot rely on one solution versus the other. We need to really consider all of our options on the table if we want to meet this in time and if we want to solve this issue.
Lovely, Mashael. Frank and Sonia, succinctly, please.
Yeah, okay. My role here is to talk about hydrogen, which is what I do, and I'm also an engineer. So I would like to give everybody some homework in thinking about an energy system that's based on 50% renewable electricity and the other half hydrogen. Now, if you cannot really think about it enough, you don't have enough creativity. Think about what else there could be, because I don't see much. But in terms of decarbonizing the energy system in the future, I think that's a dream combination.
Sonia?
Thank you. So we are living unprecedented times. The injection of capital that we are seeing as a result of response to the pandemic and the financial crisis is already much larger than the injection that we saw in 2008. So absolutely unprecedented. We must choose right. We must structure those bailouts and that injection of capital in the right way, because we are setting the basis for the next few decades of the work. If we looked in the wrong type of infrastructure, it will be a lot more difficult than already is. So calling on this idea of green and just recovery, which I mentioned in my first remarks, it must take hold in the G20 and universally, and it needs to be translated into the numbers.
Sabine, with one sentence, and I want Enrico last, simply because he is the future, i.e. Italy is happening next year.
Okay, one sentence, Connie. Okay. One sentence is that climate neutral economy, I think that's the business model of the future, and every company who do not know this will lose.
Lovely. So, thank you, Sabine. It can be done. Enrico.
For Europe, let's implement seriously the next generation EU. For US, let's wait until 20th November and let's see what happens there. And for international organizations, let's rebuild the multilateralism, because there is no way to build a more sustainable world just on bilateral basis.
And with that, a big thank you to the whole round, both for your time and for your fantastic insights and ideas and also inspiration. If the world was with people like you, then I think we have already won. We still need to convince a couple of others, but we're on a good way. Thank you. Thank you very much. Klaus.
Yes, and also from my side, it was really great from Rabia, from Mashael, from Sabine, from Frank, from Enrico and Sonia to hear the dimension what should be done in the next future and what could be done. There is some hope in front of us, but there are also some barriers, some problems in front of us. The past is structured quite well. The future should be structured in a better manner, and we heard there is something on the table already. Renewable energy and hydrogen somehow are in the center for energy just transition, but we need more transitions worldwide in other fields of society, of economy, for the food system and so. So planetary boundaries are there, and we have to be very clear about them. And we have global justice and the just transition to think how we can do it and to leave no one behind. That is a message for F20, and I think we also could hear philanthropists, foundations can play and should play their role.